Hello and welcome to episode 4 of the St. George's Movie of the Week. This week we are considering a controversial recent Academy Award winner, JoJo Rabbit. We have a couple of special guest stars here with the famous historian Dave Holte and myself, Chad Rigsby. We've got Aidan Reichel, a friend of the show who's back for the second time, and a new guest, Tristan K, who's in the house ready to discuss JoJo Rabbit with us. Welcome everybody. Thanks for coming, guys.
Yeah, thanks you guys.
Thank you.
So, usually when we get started, we kind of get kicked off with a little bit of historical context. Dave, do you want to walk us through the history of the film a little bit?
Sure. I don't think it's going to take too long because we don't need much historical context for a film that was released last year, but here it goes. So the movie was released in 2019. It's loosely based on a 2008 book called Caging Skies. It's directed by Taika Waititi. So he's a New Zealander, but I think it's probably of note for our discussion that he calls himself a Polynesian Jew, right? So he is Jewish. And one thing I found out about him is he'd been working on this film for quite a while, like at least 5 years. The film premiered at the Toronto International Film Festival, where it won the People's Choice Award. It also went to the Oscars, where it won Best Adapted Screenplay and was nominated for a few other awards as well, including Best Picture. And so I don't really feel like I need to add historical context, but I would just say that, think about increasing authoritarianism around the world over the last couple of years, obviously continued anti-Semitism, and, the continued existence and growth of hate groups as context for this film. So.
All right, thanks.
Yeah.
Usually we like to talk a little bit about favorite scenes. Aidan, this was a movie that actually you suggested. What's your favorite scene? What do you like about the movie?
My favorite scene for sure is towards the end of the movie. JoJo's at his house and five inspectors come and they start searching the place. And then Sam Rockwell's character shows up with Lannister, the actor who played Lannister from Game of Thrones. I forgot their names, but
Theon Greyjoy.
Yeah, Greyjoy. Thank you.
Yeah.
And
I'm not placing that guy. I gotta go watch it again. I didn't place that guy. Sorry.
No problem. And they start searching the house, and then Sam Rockwell's character shows up, and he starts looking at JoJo they're searching your home. Do you have anything you might need to hide? And that's when they look through where Elsa has been staying, the room where the trap door is hidden into the wall. And she imposes as JoJo's dead sister that we had never seen and we never heard about until then. And Sam Rockwell ends up defending JoJo at the end when they ask for Elsa's or his sister's / Elsa's papers. And I thought that was probably my favorite scene.
Suspenseful scene.
Yeah.
So is that why you liked it? The suspense, or
a mixture of a couple of things. Mm-hmm. First of all, I think JoJo is now kind of he is, I think, in love with Elsa at that point. He really sees that the Jewish culture and the Jewish people aren't actually really that bad. And then second, I think that it was him and mainly Sam Rockwell's character, who basically, in my interpretation, kind of just gave the middle finger to Hitler to some extent when he lied about Elsa choosing the correct birth date on the passport. And so it was a mixture of the tension and then what is Sam Rockwell's character going to do? Because we never actually got to see what the passport was, what the date on the passport was. So it's just a combination of a lot of different things and a lot of character development that I really, really enjoyed.
Yeah, what got me about that scene was I thought that the hiling over and over again was over the top, and that there was too much of it until the reverse happened, the turn, and suddenly Elsa had to do it. It was obvious, that she was torn, that she didn't want to because she's a Jewish person in hiding. So it's kind of a devastating emotional turn too, I thought, in that scene. Tristan and Dave, did you want to add anything?
I mean, I'd agree with what you said, Chad, and I think the movie which again I'll acknowledge like divides viewers, but several times throughout like has a scene that presents as pretty funny, and then all of a sudden it just flips, and all of a sudden it's just like devastating.
Right.
And so I thought it was another good example of that. I appreciate it because it's hard to know what to think about Sam Rockwell's character, just like it is so many of the people, right? Like he is a Nazi, but he is helping out here, clearly, JoJo. And so I think it's a good example of sort of that tension continually throughout the movie. What about you, Tristan? Any thoughts about that one?
I have like two thoughts. Number one, I thought the bit at the whole bit of them hailing Hitler all a bunch of times, I thought that was like, it was pretty funny because of how repetitive it was. So like they were just showing how ridiculous like it was to do that every time you saw someone, I guess. And also I forgot what I was gonna say. Oh, okay. So I don't know if this is like switching it up, I guess, but at the end of the indish of the movie, when like the same dude who was holding the papers or whatever, in that scene, how it kind of like tied in. Okay, I don't even know what I'm saying. Sorry.
He sacrifices
Never
himself.
mind.
Yeah, he
Yeah.
sacrificed himself to save JoJo at the end, which
Yeah,
to
when
me,
he takes his hat and stuff.
yeah, to me it really showed that how he basically saw like Hitler's crazy, this regime is ridiculous, no one should be living under this, no one should be oppressed just because of their beliefs. So and then he ended up saving JoJo, knowing that both of them were going to die if he didn't do what he did. And I thought it was just another great turning point for his character.
He's a complicated guy, though. I mean, because he does, I was reading up on the movie, and one reviewer said that he performs really the only true act of heroism in the movie when he saves JoJo at the end.
Huh.
However, he is going to fight the Russians,
Right.
dressed up in his getup. And, all through the movie, he's got this sort of dual, persona where, he thinks it's all ridiculous and horrifying, but he's still training those kids, and he's still, suiting up in the outfits, and he's still going off to war. So, very strange sort of commentary on, the psychology of the Germans, maybe. Anybody want to add anything? Or Dave, did you want to talk about your favorite scene?
Sure. Yeah. And I think my favorite scene in some ways is kind of similar. I like the scene where JoJo sort of chasing around that butterfly in the scene, and then he stumbles upon the people who have been hanged in like the town square, and he finds his mom's shoes, basically, right? And we recognize them because we've seen them so many times earlier in the movie. And then the scene sort of continues back home when he goes upstairs and Elsa's up there, I think, reading at the desk, and then he basically like stabs her, right? And she kind of lets him. It's a little like unclear exactly how that's happening. But a few things I liked. I mean, first of all, like chasing butterflies is like very childlike, right? And then he's confronted with this horrible scene, which is his like mother has been hanged. And so like that for JoJo really begins to like kind of tear down his belief in Nazism and Adolf Hitler, I would say. And then, with the stabbing of Elsa, I mean, I wasn't quite sure why. I mean, I understand he's upset. And it's like a last attempt for him to sort of still be like a good Nazi by stabbing her, or he's just like enraged by what has happened and like is casting around for blame. So I just thought it was a really powerful scene, and kind of like the one Aidan described. It's like you're in the middle of a movie that's been like mostly humorous, and then all of a sudden it goes from like absurdity to just tragedy, which is kind of something Chad had mentioned to me before about how this film can work. I don't know. What were your guys' thoughts on that scene?
It seems to me like I definitely agree with JoJo being, in my opinion, that was the only time that JoJo was childish throughout the entire movie. Like, one of the scenes that I definitely remember is when his mom and him are sitting on like those big steps, and his shoe's untied, and he goes and, well, Scarlett Johansson, JoJo's mom, goes to tie his shoe, and she ends up doing a John DeForest, ties them together, and then he trips. And no adult would do that. That was like more her like being childish. And then we see her running across a rock wall while JoJo's on the path. Like, she's trying to balance and she's having fun. And so to me, that just kind of shows like JoJo has never really done anything childish his entire life. He's been going to military camps for a while now. He's had, you know, he was forced to try to kill a rabbit. He was given a knife at age 11. He threw a grenade into a tree. Like, he's not doing normal kid stuff. And so to me, that was the first time where I guess he was like really, to some extent, like free of thought. Like, oh, I want to make this decision. I'm going to go do this. Like, not really controlled by the Nazis or like the system, I guess.
He is childish, though. I mean, I think a lot of times in the movie, you know, he has an imaginary friend, right? Which is something that little kids have. And his imaginary friend, horrifyingly, is Hitler, obviously. But the other thing is, I don't think it's clear that he can tie his shoes until he ties his mom's shoe when she's in there, which is just a devastating.
Yeah.
There's nothing, you know, there's nothing that he can do other than the childish sort of mimicry of an adult. It's like, well, now it's time to learn to tie a shoe. So I thought that was the most heartbreaking part of the scene. And then it continues, and sort of we have the beginning of his transformation, I think, away from someone who's wants to be an adult but is really childish about it and sort of miseducated about what it is. So that was sort of my take. Other thoughts?
Well, for me, I kind of saw it coming from the very beginning. I think the first time they introduced the mother, it showed her shoes first, as well as I noticed on other parts of the movies, like when JoJo was in like the pool area, his mother was like up, like on a step above him at almost the same level as when she was hanging, as well as the path when she was on the wall and he was on the floor. It was kind of like symbolizing that, I don't know.
It was some foreshadowing for sure.
Yeah,
I was like, what's up with the shoes? Why do I keep seeing these? Yeah. Well, my favorite scene was probably the opening scene, which sets the Beatles music after we have the sort of ridiculous introduction of JoJo's imaginary friend. And, you know, as an audience member, I didn't know whether, you know, I thought it was funny, but I was afraid to laugh. And then we have the exuberant sort of JoJo racing out into the street, shouting Nazi slogans set against the Beatles, I Want to Hold Your Hand, and footage of all of the Hitler rallies. So I thought that was a fascinating sort of juxtaposition. And I think it leads us into the mailbag a little bit. We got 96 emails this week from around the country.
Whoa.
They're basically asking, I know, and basically they were asking the same thing. One person asked, what the heck? One person asked, is Hitler supposed to be funny? One person asked, is this film in good taste? And another person asked, is this a decent way to represent the Holocaust? And so maybe get started, because I think this is a pretty big question. We'll kick it over to Dave and talk about how historians consider representation of the Holocaust. Dave, are you comfortable talking about that?
Sure. Just, really briefly. I mean, it's a huge historical debate that any of our graduating seniors can now talk about a little bit because we discuss it in class. But there's an idea among scholars that the Holocaust stands outside of history, which would mean you can't compare it to anything else, which maybe is kind of less relevant for this film because it's not trying to compare it to something else. But, generally, historians are going to say you should always be careful in how you present historical events. And I guess whether that's as a historian or as an artist or an author, but the Holocaust sort of has particular importance. And that's in part because people say it's so difficult to understand. And so if something is embellished or downplayed, it can sort of threaten to minimize our remembrance of the Holocaust. And so I think, we don't really want to go too far down this road, but just that it is an incredibly important issue, and it often then relates, I would say, to how people also represent like Nazism and Adolf Hitler, which is probably more relevant for this film.
So one of the things I think to add on to that is to stay away from this sort of there are very good people on both sides formulation, which was famously used after the Charlottesville attacks a few years ago, which were racially motivated hate crimes. So is this a case in this film where the movie is arguing that we should think about Nazism as there are very good people on both sides, or is it more complicated than that?
I think it's definitely more complicated than that, because we watched Operation Finale, which is another movie, and that's about hunting down one of the main concentration camp people who had the list, who would go around and wrangle people up, and then that person was not a good person. Yes, he had a family. He was good to his wife. He was good to his children. But at the end, he slaughtered, millions of Jewish people. And so I think more it's that there's one side which is mainly good in the Holocaust, the people who are trying to stop anti-Semitic, anti-Nazi, beliefs. And then there's the Nazis. But I think the bridge is Sam Rockwell's character, because I think he knows that Hitler and the Reich is crazy. And he does everything he can to protect JoJo. He sacrificed himself for JoJo. He lied about Elsa when he knew Elsa was a Jew. And I think he knew Elsa was a Jew anyway. And so I think there isn't good people on both sides, but there is the silent fighters on both sides, on the bad side. The one who is trying to help people as much as they can, but can't really do much because of their position within the regime.
I think that's interesting. Did you want to say something, Dave?
Yeah, I would say, I agree with Aidan. It is more complicated. And to kind of the scene you talked about, Chad, which is that opening sequence where they have the Beatles music in German, right? And at the end, is it a David Bowie song that they have in German as well, I think?
I think so.
And so I kind of got to thinking about some of that, and also then just the accents, which are obviously, there's some Kiwi accents, there's some British accents, and one thing that occurred to me is that begins to break down this idea that you used to see in scholarship a while ago, which is Germans are capable of things like the Holocaust, but the rest of us are not, right? And so by hearing the accents that are clearly not German, and maybe not the way we think about Nazis being represented in films, I thought it sort of muddied up that issue of who might be capable of this, some of the accents, but then that opening scene in particular as well. So.
One question I have, Tristan, did you want to say something? I'm sorry.
No, you can go first.
Maybe you were going to answer this. My question is JoJo a good person?
I think to some extent he is. I think at the beginning of the movie, he was definitely not a good person, because you see him at the beginning. Again, opening scene is a great scene, and how it's Hitler walking back and forth and telling him what is your mind made of? Snake mind. What is your what is your courage? Panther courage. And all those creatures, panthers are very stealthy animals, very strong. Snakes are portrayed as deceiving and evil. So I think he was a horrible person at the beginning of the movie. Right. He just didn't know what he wanted to do, what was going on. And then finally, I think it just totally moves through throughout the entire film. And then he starts realizing, Nazis are crazy. This is completely wrong. I'm now in love with a Jewish girl. What am I supposed to do? And then he eventually decides, no, Jewish people are fine. I was wrong. And eventually he gets there. But I think for sure he was a horrible person at the beginning.
Chad, what do you think?
I think he's a terrible person at the beginning. I think there's, I imagined a different movie while I was watching it because I was concerned about this question of representation. And so the only thing he does at the beginning of the movie that suggests that he might be a good person is his refusal to kill the rabbit. Other than that, he's looking for Jewish people to murder. He hopes he finds one that he can kill. He's completely bought into Nazism. But we do see him, refuse to kill the rabbit. And I did imagine another movie that would be a more accurate or realistic representation of the Holocaust in which he decided to kill the rabbit, like all the other, older kids are encouraging him to do. And then that movie would take us down a very different path. It would be more predictable, more horrifying, not funny. But I'm not sure it wouldn't be productive in the same way. What the movie reminded me the most of was Huckleberry Finn, which is a book about a kid who accompanies an escaped slave, and he's planning to return back to slavery for the whole thing until he realizes they've become friends, and he decides, I'll go to hell instead of doing it. One thing I wondered is, how much is JoJo to blame for his cruelty, or is it a product of the education system that he's grown up in? I don't know if people have thoughts about that.
Well, I think, it's just, well, I don't know if, maybe, okay, sorry. So, I think that if JoJo was raised, in any other place, I don't think, well, obviously it wouldn't be like he was there, but, I don't know if in the beginning JoJo was a bad person or if he was just doing what he was taught in, school and other places, which I guess makes you a bad person, but, that is also a product of where he grew up and stuff. And he didn't, I don't know if he, okay. Sorry.
No, I totally agree with you, Tristan.
Yeah.
If he wasn't in that scenario, it almost reminds me of, there's this, okay, we're getting a little off, but there's this one scene of Avatar: The Last Airbender where Aang visits a firebending school, and nobody knows what freedom of thought is. Nobody knows what dancing is. Nobody knows what creativity is. And he keeps getting shot down. And I think that's basically the same with JoJo, where he grew up in this environment where people have been telling him since the day he was born, Jewish people are horrible. They had sex with a fish and they have scales now. All these horrible lies that he's been told since that's all he's been hearing. And his mom has just been going around trying to stop that with his dad. But you can't really do anything when one parent says this, but everyone else around you says something else. I think it's totally a product of his environment.
Right. The Rebel Wilson character is like a phenomenal elementary school teacher. She's fun and all the kids love her and she's hilarious and she's engaging and she tells them a bunch of lies about Jewish people that they believe. Were you going to say something, Dave?
Yeah, I think I agree with what people have said. It's kind of hard to figure out how responsible he is, but clearly he's influenced by his peers and wanting to be a part of, I think, what's essentially the Hitler Youth. I actually don't know if they called it that there. And so, I'm not sure if it absolves him fully and completely, but it's clearly in large part because of these institutions and larger society. So I basically agree with what Aidan and Tristan said.
Right. Are we supposed to feel sorry for him? In what way are we supposed to relate to him as viewers? So the audience, we're the only other ones who can see Hitler. And I was wondering sort of what that meant. We're in on it in a way that nobody else is. So how are we supposed to take JoJo? That's kind of a difficult question, and I didn't really prepare people for that. So I don't know if anybody have any thoughts? How are we supposed to? Are we supposed to pity JoJo? Are we supposed to identify with JoJo? Are we supposed to wonder if we're JoJo?
Yeah, I think we're supposed to pity him. I don't think we're supposed to relate to him, but I definitely think we're supposed to pity him and feel sorry for him. Because, you know, he gets bullied by the older kids. He is kind of like the runt. Even Yorkie, his best friend, is better than him at everything. And, you know, he's just like chubby little fat kid. And oh geez, I just lost my train of thought. But he's just the runt. And I think that's where we're supposed to feel sorry for him. I think that within the system that he is in, he is like the worst person. Like he's like the person nobody likes. But I think like if you take a step back and look in, again, like we already said, like he's already a horrible person. But within his group and within like the environment that his environment made for him, we see him as, you know, kind of a loser to some extent. Like now he's a deformed kid because he was an idiot during, you know, grenade throwing training. And I think we're supposed to pity him because he's an idiot. But we're not supposed to pity him because of the system he's in.
Agreement? Disagreement? Interesting take.
I think I mostly agree. I mean, I agree, like JoJo is not a good person, but he's not like he's not evil in the way Nazis are often portrayed, right? Like he's naive. He doesn't really know what's going on. And so like I kind of, to your earlier question, Chad, I tend to think like we're supposed to ask ourselves like, could I be JoJo or could I have been JoJo, right? And like bought into like these ideas which are completely absurd, right? Like about where Jewish people come from, whether they have horns and things like that. And so I think the movie, it's like we laugh at the things that JoJo believes in, but I think it's intended to have us consider whether we would have believed them at that time, and like how that relates to like whether we would be horrible people as well, right? Does that make sense to people?
Yeah, I mean, I'd take it a step further, unless Tristan wants to. Tristan, did you want to say something?
Oh, no, you go.
I'd say that it made me reflect on my own education right now and the ways in which, you know, JoJo doesn't know. JoJo thinks he's a good German, right? JoJo thinks he's a good person. He thinks that his mom, who is unpatriotic and wants Germany to lose the war, he thinks that that's a bad thing about her. And they have a fight at the dinner table, you know, the big battle at the dinner table. So if it's possible that JoJo has been miseducated to the point of not understanding the world properly, then it's also possible that I've been miseducated that way. And so I thought back to like, you know, we're better at it in 2020 than we were in 1978. But when I was a little kid, you know, at school, when it was Thanksgiving time, everybody was like, the Native Americans were happy and they got along with the Pilgrims, and it was just a big bummer that things didn't work out. And we would dress up and play dress up, and you know, we thought it was fun, very much like the imaginary world that JoJo lives in. And now we regard that as dangerous. Visions of Columbus and slavery are similar in that way as well. So that was sort of something that I wondered about. And for me, it made the movie better, because I felt sorry for JoJo, but I also felt like I might be him and not know it. And so it reaffirmed my need for critical thinking and for conversations like this. We feel good about that topic?
Yeah.
Bounce over to one other sort of thread of questions that I think Aidan touched on earlier. So the person who is probably the most heroic person in the film is Colonel K. Captain K, excuse me. Who you know, he saves JoJo at the end. And he's represented as a gay man in Nazi Germany. And he wears the sort of flamboyant, outlandish, ridiculous suit that he's created at the end. And some scholars have taken issue with that representation of queerness in the film. how do we feel about that? Do we feel like that's an excuse? You know, it's an easy way to explain his goodness, or is it more complicated and layered than that?
Like, are you talking about his like feathers and stuff at the end of the
Yeah,
movie?
the pink feathers, and I think even Dave was mentioning he had a pink triangle, which was what is it true that
The Nazis
Nazis
made
required that to be worn
yeah.
Well,
on the uniform? Go ahead.
well, I thought that was like for me. I thought that was just making fun of Nazis. Like wasn't aware that that was making fun of anything else. Like, it just well for me, like the whole movie made the Nazis like feel over the top and like like silly or ridiculous, and so I thought that was just adding to it.
Did you think that he was attempting to do that? Like he was attempting in his
Yeah.
moments. Was he sort of, was it a pride thing, or was it a in your face, you know, resistance against the Nazis? I mean, he is going off to fight and kill Russians, so it's very complicated. For me, it's troubling and kind of problematic, but I'm curious, you know, maybe I'm wrong. I think it's unnecessary. I think the fact that he had one eye and the fact that he had lost it in Operation Screw Up, and that because of that he knows that this war effort is doomed, futile, ridiculous, and you know he's drinking all the time in front of the kids. That was enough for me. But there's this additional layer of his goodness, which you know I think it's what we're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I think the point they're trying to make, and maybe I'm wrong, is like, like JoJo at the end kind of like is discovering who he actually is, right, and not buying into the Nazi beliefs. And I think it's the same idea that they're trying to make with the captain, right? He's like expressing himself like separate from like the institutions of Nazism. And I read a little bit about it too, and it just kind of seemed like unnecessary. And if you're going to have like a gay Nazi in a film, like you should probably explore that in more detail and in maybe more meaningful ways than sort of throwing it in. Is kind of how I feel about it.
I agree. I mean, he's an important character. Ilsa, you know, is much. I think she's drawn much better. The Jewish girl hiding in the the attic. For me, you know, her sort of relationship with JoJo is believable and is given enough attention that it has sort of realistic density. But I'm not sure that, as much as I like Captain K and I think he's important, and I think that his heroism at the end of the movie makes for a great scene, I'm not sure that they paid him the proper attention. Yeah. Did you agree or disagree, or no opinion?
It's kind of complicated for me because I have very strong beliefs about political correctness in movies and like what they should, how they should go about it. And that's not saying they shouldn't be in it, just right. To our viewers, to make that clear. It's more of just like, it's a movie. I think they should be able to do whatever they want. But I do think it has a part in it for sure. I do agree with Tristan where I think it was showing that like, look how over the top Nazis are. Like, feathers, like his like buddy was carrying a record player with them. Like, just over the top, just like crazy ideas. And I thought that was, mainly to show like what, like the Nazi people have become to, like what German citizens were at the time. They were just crazy people.
Well, I'm sorry, go ahead.
But I do think it definitely has something to, or it has some connection to his queerness, that he is gay. But I don't think I'd be able to pin it down, like why he's doing it because he's gay, or is he just or is Taika putting it in the movie to just show that, like, even the gay people, even the homosexuals of Germany at the time were just absolutely brainwashed by this. I thought that's what it really meant. Interesting.
I mean, it does make sense that they would sort of, come out of the closet in the instance before they're going to die. I mean, it seems that everyone's going to die, and it's, it's the Slaughterhouse-Five scene with all the children running into battle, like the Children's Crusade. It's quite a scene. Some reviewers I read really liked it. Others found that it fell flat. I thought it was a good scene. But that was one part that I had questions about. So we have just under 4 minutes, and this thing shuts off pretty quickly on the Zoom meeting. Final thoughts about JoJo Rabbit?
Can I go?
Sure.
So, for me, I found that this movie was a lot like another movie called The Dictator, where it just makes fun of a bunch of serious topics, and I don't know. I just thought it was funny in some parts.
I think for sure I think its root is supposed to be definitely comedic. Like, I don't think it was supposed to, I think its main goal was to, have the serious, kid brainwashed in Nazi Germany, finds a Jewish girl in his attic and is, conflicted about what to do. But at its core, it's a comedic movie. It reminds me another movie, The Death of Stalin, which I don't know if any of you. That's good. And it's Stalin dies and everyone's freaking out, and it's a power race after that. It's kind of the same with this, it's okay, except it's kind of flip. It's JoJo is super, kind of a loser, kind of the runt, and then he is trying to find his place in the world, but then he actually realizes, the system's corrupt, and he gets out of it. But, all of Stalin's cronies were not as lucky.
Right. Dave, final thoughts?
Sure. I mean, I think Chad knows this because we've talked about the movie a couple times this week. I've sort of changed how I feel about this movie several times, and I probably will continue to do so. So I recommend people watch it and actually read a lot about it if you're going to watch it. Because I think it does some cool things, kind of as I mentioned before, and I stole this from Chad, a lot of absurdity that you see with authoritarian leaders is really obviously leads to tragedy. And I think that's a lot of what this movie is about. I ended up appreciating its message. But Chad, I'll turn it over to you to wrap it up with your final thoughts.
Thank you. Yeah. I mean, one of the people that I like to read is this woman, Masha Gessen, who grew up in Soviet Russia. And she was somebody who really liked the movie. She said, this is the way it feels to live in a totalitarian regime. Everybody thinks that they're a good person. Everybody is involved in the absurdity. She was like, hey, there might be a global pandemic, but your leader is about, being mistreated on Facebook. That's the level of absurdity that Taika Waititi is talking about. So I think it's a worthwhile movie to watch, but not everybody's going to love it, certainly. It's interesting to think about at the level of representation. So we're almost out of time. Thanks so much for joining us. Tristan.
Thank you, guys.
Thank
Great
you.
talk.
Thank
We'll
you.
see you later.
All right. See y'all.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.